3 higher ed authors, 100 plus college and university presidents, dozens of actionable insights for academic leaders. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, is now available on Amazon. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. Dr. Joe Salustio back with you on another episode. Here, you see how fast I'm talking now because I've said this over 600 times here on the EdUp Experience podcast, as we've just recently passed 275,000 downloads / plays of our episodes here. You continue to honor us with your love and attention of the podcast and listening to the amazing guests we continue to bring to the microphone. I'm really excited about today's episodes because we have a convergence of authors. We just had this discussion. Well, do we mention your book, or do we mention my book or your book? And so we all wrote a book, and we're going to talk about all 3 stinking books here at the EdUp Experience because that's what we're allowed to do. I'm going to bring in my guest co-host first. He has his own podcast. He has his own book, and he has his own company. And he started his own company. Here he is. Wait a minute. I wasn't prepared all the way to bring him in. Here he is. Attention. He is Elliot Felix. He's founder of Bright Spot Strategy and author of How to Get the Most Out of College. Elliot, what's going on?
It's good to be here. And 275,000 downloads / plays is remarkable. And I want to know who's downloading but not playing. Are they just saving it for a later date or whatever? Because they should be listening.
They should be. If they download it, I like to think they're downloading it for later and playing it later, but I get the download or play either way. And some, this, on some places they're called downloads and some places they're called plays. Either way, 275,000 times is a lot, and we're proud and we're very excited. You have your own little podcast that you're doing off your book, which you're the author of How to Get the Most Out of College, which I was on your podcast. Thank you for having me, along with my co-author, Kate Colbert.
And we talked about student parents, which is, I'm so delighted for today's conversation because we're going to have another great one about student parents, even better.
Who knew when we talked about student parents that we'd be here about to talk more about student parents with our guest today? And I meant to have this ready for you, Elliot, and I just wasn't prepared. Here she is. She's Nicole Lynn Lewis. She's founder and CEO of Generation Hope and author of Pregnant Girl. How are you, Nicole?
I'm great. I'm excited to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Did you know it was going to be this messy when you came on? Already, it's just kind of like we're just working through it,
I love it. I love messy. It's great.
Well, we always like to start with kind of a level set, all right? So we have an audience here, higher education focused primarily. Tell us about Generation Hope. What is it that you do, and how do you do it?
Yeah, well, I can often start that question off with a little bit about my own story and what led me to starting Generation Hope. I was a teen mom. I got pregnant my senior year of high school, and I had just been accepted into a bunch of different colleges when I discovered my pregnancy. And I was a college-bound honor roll student, very much preparing for post-secondary experiences after high school. Both my parents were college educated. My sister had already gone off to college and was in grad school at Yale when I discovered my pregnancy. So education was a big deal in our home. And I heard the same message that many young women hear in that situation: your life is over. You're not going to go to college. And it was extremely scary and intimidating. And I knew at the same time that college was probably the most reliable way for me to actually provide for this child. And so I started at the College of William and Mary in Virginia when my daughter was a little under 3 months old. And I stepped foot on campus. I always tell people, I looked down at my feet and thought, these feet don't belong here. I was surrounded by students who had a ton of resources and supports and networks and didn't have parenting responsibilities. And also most of the students didn't look like me. I was one of very few Black students at William and Mary. And so I put one foot in front of the other and said, let me see where it takes me. And 4 years later, my daughter and I walked across the graduation stage. So it was just, this incredible moment where you experience something that people say is impossible. And so that experience really sparked a fire for me to ensure that other young parents and parents of any age had the resources and supports that they deserve to earn a post-secondary credential. I could see how transformative it was in my life and my daughter's life. And so I started Generation Hope in 2010, really with that as our North Star. And our organization helps teen moms and teen dads earn their college degrees while also helping their children get ready for early elementary school success. And then we also advocate nationally for parenting college students all across the country with policymakers and with colleges and universities really looking to transform higher education and then also to remove barriers for families nationwide. So it's incredible work and very much hard work.
Amazing.
You know that the world of higher education is experiencing evolutions and revolutions. You want to be part of the progress. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education with insights from more than 100 college and university presidents, will show you how. Get your copy of Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education now on Amazon right away. We think you're going to love it. It's
Amazing.
How does this happen? Right? You fast forward, you get your degree, you're obviously passionate that this experience has affected you so much so that you go, you know what? I want to help other people in this particular situation. How does that trigger flick on, right? Or maybe not a trigger, the light switch flick on. How do you just go, oh, I want to do something like this to help others? What was there an event? Was it something? Was it just a combination of experiences that led you to the moment to go, I'm going to help others? Or was there some other event or, how does it happen?
I think it was a combination of things. First, and I think many people can relate to this, when you're going through something extremely difficult, you're often wondering why, why is this happening? Why am I experiencing this? There were many dark days and difficult days as a young mom in college. And I think when I graduated, I realized that there was a larger purpose. There was a reason that I went through what I went through, and realizing that it was about making sure that other people had an easier time of getting through college, that it shouldn't be this hard, right? So that was one thing. The other thing is that I looked across the ecosystem of nonprofit organizations and was trying to find a nonprofit in the DC region that was actually focused on college completion for teen parents. None existed, and very few across the country. And so that was this moment of like, why? This is such a big piece of the puzzle that's missing when it comes to economic mobility and all of these issues that people care about, from housing insecurity to food insecurity to how children are faring, how families are faring. And so I just felt like it was this huge missing piece that I could do something about. I had the lived experience. I didn't see myself as a founder or a CEO, and that was probably the hardest part of starting Generation Hope, was to actually see myself as someone who could start this organization. And I think a lot of that has to do with, many times people in my seat they don't look like me and they don't have lived experience, right? And so once I got over that was where the aha moment kicked in, to say, maybe I can do something to fill a gap and create an organization that needs to exist in the world.
Elliot, I know you have a lot to say and a lot to contribute to this conversation because you wrote so much about this in your book. So I'm going to pass it over to you because I know you're ready.
Absolutely. And I recently had the privilege and the pleasure of attending a session at NASPA that your team, Nicole, did a fantastic job with. And it was almost like a choose your own adventure, or in a way to help people understand and empathize with student parents. It was like choose your own misadventure, and you went through all the tough decisions that you have to make as a student parent. Do I accept this scholarship? It means I'm going to have to go full time, which means I have to quit my job, or do I and accept this loan, and do I have the paperwork? And it was really a fantastic session, and maybe the highlight of it was hearing at the end about your Family U cohort, which sounds like you're maybe not just helping, I shouldn't say just, not helping moms and dads, but also trying to help institutions. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, first, I'm going to take that feedback back to my team, because we have a fabulous team of folks at Generation Hope. And our learning and innovation team was really excited to be presenting at that conference. And so I will take that feedback back to them. And one quick thing that I'd like to mention on that activity, it's really, as Elliot said, this opportunity for us to help people walk in the shoes of a student parent and have to make the tough decisions that come with being a parenting student. And a big reason for that is building empathy and helping people to really understand that honestly, there are no easy decisions, there are no clear choices, that everything is hard. And a lot of this work around student parents is about shifting mindsets and really speaking to people's hearts. Because it is such an invisible population. There is a lot of stigma associated with teen parents and single mothers and first generation college students, and like all the intersectionality that comes with this population. And so that activity has been really wonderful in helping people quickly understand what is at the core of this work. And so I'm happy to hear that that was your experience. Yeah, so we added to our mission about maybe 3 years ago, systems change work. And that came from this realization that we had been doing this wonderful work directly with families for over a decade. And we had really observed these sinkholes across higher education when it comes to making sure that student parents are successful. You know, we had worked with 20 different 2- and 4-year schools in the DC region in supporting our students and getting to the graduation stage. And then we had started working with and having relationships with schools outside of that region, and noticed that this was not specific to a geography, it was not specific to a type of school, that all of higher education is grappling with how to support this population, if it's even on their radar, right? Like for most people working in higher education, these folks are not even on their radar. And so we started our Family U technical assistance program, where we partner with colleges and universities all across the country. We have a 2-year cohort where we do a deep dive on how you can really transform your campus to be more family friendly. We make sure that student parents are a part of that transformation. It's been amazing. We've worked with 2 cohorts so far, and we're recruiting our 3rd cohort now. And it's been so rewarding and awesome to see not only that we can have an impact on families, but that we can have an impact on millions of students, right? That we don't necessarily interact with directly, but that these institutions are supporting.
Go back in time a little bit for me and go back to your statement that you said that you walked on the campus and you looked down at your feet and you said, I'm not sure if I belong here. Belong is obviously a buzzword. And I'm going to say it's a buzzword. It's an important word right now because it gets at the heart of the whole DEI conversation, right? Belonging is kind of, I think, a foundational concept. But you took a step forward and you thought, let me take a step forward and see where it takes me. We know that all of us know, 3 of us here, and I say we because many of our listeners and those that I've interviewed on the podcast talk about how a student doesn't take that step forward. They take the step backward and they turn around and they go in the complete other direction. Maybe they never encounter higher education again because they just, I don't know, something they weren't ready, mentally ready. The the overwhelming feeling of being a parent and going to college comes with its own, who's looking at me and why are they looking at me different because I'm a mom or a dad or whatever else. And what happens to them because societal pressure and peer pressure makes them feel a certain way that they don't belong. And all of a sudden what happens to them and the way they provide for their family and what happens to those kids and how do they grow up. And so there's so many like rippling effects, dropping a rock in the middle of the ocean and seeing the ripples go out. We don't even know the ripples way out from that one decision to either take a step forward or take a step back. How do you wrap resources around that step? Because isn't that step one of the most important ones that they take?
Absolutely. And I love your description of the ripple effect, right? And it speaks to the generational aspect of this student parent work, right? That step determines the steps of so many generations following that student or that potential student. I think the big thing is ensuring that your institution is communicating early on in various ways, both physical and the intangible ways that this student does belong on this campus. So I'll give you a great example with my experience. I was locked into an orientation group that was for transfer students because they didn't know what to do with me. They didn't have a orientation group or any sort of system or structure set up for students who were incoming freshmen and who had children. I couldn't live on campus because there were no family housing apartments designated for undergraduate students. So here I was commuting 150 miles every day to get to and from campus. And so they didn't know what to do with me. And so they lumped me in with this transfer group, which immediately communicated to me that there was no system in place. There were no champions. There was no acknowledgement or recognition that I even existed on that campus. And so, the flip side of that is ensuring that your institution knows that a student coming in is parenting, having mechanisms in place in the enrollment process to be able to gather that information. Most colleges and universities are not collecting any data on the parenting status of their students. So they're flying blind when it comes to the experiences of their students. And then making sure that there is something in place. There's a way to communicate early on that they belong, that there is something in place to ensure that they're successful as a student parent at that institution, having an orientation group, having childcare set up at, during campus tours or during the orientation. There's lots of different ways in that critical moment, as you described, to ensure that a student feels supported. Every student is not going to take that step forward. And I came into my higher ed experience with the advantage of having two college educated parents and having a sister that was in grad school. When we look at the student parent population, that is often not the case, right? And so I did have advantages coming into my higher ed experience that many, many student parents are not going to have. And those advantages have made it easier for me to take that step forward. But for many students, that feeling of, I don't belong, this isn't set up for me, they don't want me here, is overwhelming. And it can make the difference between you moving forward and not.
Go ahead, Elliot.
Are there things you look for to know that an institution is family friendly, is student parent friendly? Like what's your litmus test? What are the indicators?
Yeah, well, first, I think when I talk to a lot of higher education leaders, they'll say, oh, we have a childcare center. So like we check that box, we're good. And the childcare center is one piece of such a bigger puzzle. And I say that because my next question is often, well, do you have students with children in that childcare center? And many times those folks don't even know. Many of the childcare centers on campus are really for faculty and staff. Students are not utilizing those childcare centers. And so helping people to understand that it goes way beyond whether you have a brick and mortar childcare center on your campus. It's really about your culture as an institution, and is your culture set up in a way that students with children know that this is a place for them, that they have the resources to succeed. All of that is really important. So at Generation Hope, we look at 4 key components. We're looking at data. We want institutions to be collecting the data on the parenting status of their students. Everything starts with data, and understanding who your student body is. We have institutions that have been a part of our Family U cohorts who start collecting the data and come to find that 35 or 40% of their students are parenting. And it's significant in many cases, and yet it's been a blind spot for many of them. The next thing that we're looking at is policy. Do you have institutional policies that are inclusive of student parents, or are they really pushing student parents away? A great example of that is many institutions have a no kids on campus policy. And it's easy to recognize that that's a policy that is really, really marginalizing for student parents. And it has huge impacts. If I can't come on campus, and my childcare fell through and I can't meet with that advisor or that professor to get that extra help, then I don't do well on the test. I don't do well on the test. It has a snowball effect. Like there's so many ways that it really makes it hard for students to be successful. So looking at your policies across the institution are really important. And then people. What we hear time and time again is you can have higher ed leadership, administrators who are very supportive of the student parent population, but if the people who are interacting with your students every day do not understand how important it is to be supportive of student parents, it doesn't matter. They're going to spend the most time in their classrooms. And so if your frontline staff and faculty are not valuing student parents and being supportive, then it's not going to work, right? So looking at people practices. And then the final thing we look at is just overall culture, and that's both the physical aspects of an institution, but also those intentional or intangible norms and traditions and things like that. So things like, do you have diaper changing stations that are accessible to students in different buildings? Do you have lactation spaces that students and faculty can access? Parent-friendly parking, things like that. But then in your materials, in your marketing materials, are there pictures of students with children so that if I'm walking down the hall, I can see myself and represented in the school's collateral and marketing materials? I often talk to college presidents and they'll say, oh, this is going to cost like millions of dollars. It's not. Like something like that is a $0 impact, right? It's just about being intentional in including this population in your communication. So those are the 4 things that we look for. And we've seen institutions doing some really creative things in each of those spaces that we're excited about.
You know what's interesting about that whole conversation as it relates to higher ed, if you look at the bigger concept, these are teen parents going to college, right? Higher ed has like a brand loyalty problem, right? I talk about this on the podcast all the time. My 3 degrees are from 3 different institutions, right? And there aren't many people that I know. And yes, if you take program aside, because some institutions may not have doctoral or whatever, but it's not like there's that many people that go, oh, I got my undergrad and my master's and my doctoral all from the same university because I loved going there. There's usually at least 2 choices that students will make if they're going, one for the master's, one for the baccalaureate. And it's not typical for a student to stay loyal to their brand. And you think about this from a brand loyalty perspective, and you have a student who's coming in for a 4-year with something that could be perceived to be a barrier that you don't prepare for. How you've destroyed, even if they get through, you've destroyed that brand loyalty for the future. They're always going to remember it. They're always going to remember it. They're going to go somewhere else. They're going to go, you know what? My experience wasn't perfect at this last institution. I'm going to go somewhere else. Now that I'm a parent and I'm successful and I'm working and I'm making money, I'm going to go back and get my master's degree. I'm not going back to this school. It didn't have these services, right, Ellie? And you're the marketer here.
Well, yeah, we just did a national survey called a Student Experience Snapshot, and it has in it a Net Promoter Score, which is a measure of customer loyalty. Did you say how many people said 9 or 10 out of 10? If you're asked how likely are you to recommend this institution to a friend or family member, and the score, I just looked it up, is 16, which is about as good as like a cable company or a power company. You really want to be above 30. You want to be in like the 30 to 60 range, or 60 and above is exceptional. So I think there's definitely some room for improvement. And I love Nicole, the 4-part formula, the data, the policy, the people, the culture, to get there. And I'm curious, like, what about student parent centers? How important are those? I'm seeing campuses create a dedicated center that offers, community and resources and support for people. Not a lot of, not every campus has one, should they?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I just want to revisit this idea around brand loyalty as well. One of the first questions that I ask folks working in this field is, as they think about student parents, do they view them as an asset or a liability? And really being honest about that. And I think if we're being honest, most of the folks working in higher ed, if they're thinking about student parents, are thinking about them as a liability. What we know is that student parents have higher GPAs on average than their non-parenting peers. And so as schools are thinking about enrollment and retention, this is a population that is highly motivated to complete, and they have incredible potential. They're not being able to complete is about a failure in our systems. and in our institutions. And so as we're working on brand loyalty, as we're working on retention and completion and enrollment, this is a population that is really right in front of us that we're not paying attention to, that we're not investing in the ways that we should. And so that's often something that I really try to stress with people. The student parent centers, I love that. I think it's great to have a place on campus where if I'm a student parent, I can go. I know that it's a safe space for me. I know it's a place where people get it and they understand. And so we love to see that. What we want to make sure is that the student parent work isn't relegated to one department. So that making sure that people don't say, well, we have a student parent center for that, right? No, we want to make sure that the student parent center is a part of a larger effort across the institution that includes financial aid, that includes the admissions department, it includes academic affairs, it includes our policy work and our strategic planning and like all of those things. So making sure that that student parent center is a part of a larger effort, I think is really important.
What do you see in terms of, well, I was going to ask you a question, but then I thought I'd go back to your orientation bit, because as a higher ed administrator and somebody who is in enrollment and I have orientations going on around me, and I'm putting myself in that situation where you come in and you're a young parent, and what would I do? Right? It's orientation. There's kids flying around everywhere. The event's huge. I've got resources running around, and now I have this student parent come on campus, but I don't have a cohort of students to stick you with because maybe I haven't identified that there's other student parents, but maybe I just know you. Where do I stick you? Right? Oh, right with the transfer students, because probably some of them, you know, maybe some of them are transfer students because of similar issues, or they're not going to be living on campus. So I'll immediately assume that my student parent isn't going to be living on campus because I don't have those housing abilities, right? I'm putting this scenario to work here. So I end up putting you with transfer students and there's no relevance. What would it take for me to walk to you and pick you out of the crowd and say, I'm sorry we didn't have a cohort of students ready for you, but we do have a pathway. We do have the resources to make you comfortable. That intentionality, when we talk about personalized experiences in higher education, getting to my point, I don't really do any of that for the record, but I was imagining myself there. How do you personalize the experience for every single student? Because every single student is demanding a personalized experience. So if you're not going to personalize it for teen parents, then you're not going to have teen parents, right? I mean, isn't that the point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the ideal scenario would be that you have mechanisms in place to get to know your students before they come to orientation, right? And that you would have a way to have that information so that even if you didn't have comprehensive structures in place, you could identify that student at check-in and say, hey, we know that you're parenting, we've set up some things for you and let's talk about it, right? And so I think that's the key, is having those mechanisms in place. At Generation Hope, obviously our whole organization was built around the student parent experience. But one of the things that we do when we first accept students in the program, we obviously through our application process get to know them, but then we do something called academic planning meetings with each student at the beginning of the semester, each semester. And those meetings are called academic planning meetings, but they're really like life meetings. And we talk about anything that could be coming down the pike for that student. When it comes to housing, when it comes to childcare, we might find out, oh, I'm living with my mom, but she just took a job in another state. So in 2 months, I'm homeless, like I don't have a place to live, right? We could find out about domestic violence situations in those conversations, anything that could cause an interruption to their college journey or really put them and their children in a bad situation. And so I think thinking about how do institutions set up systems that may not look exactly like that, but where you really are getting to know your students, you're having conversations, you're planning ahead, you're thinking through what might be coming down the pike. And so making those systematic, I think, is the key. And it has to start before they get to campus. And then it has to continue when they're on campus, and figuring out what does that look like. It's not going to be a one size fits all across higher education, but figuring out for your institution, what does it look like to have those conversations so that you really are understanding where every student is and what they might need.
100%.
Disruptive agreement. That's my disruptive agreement.
Go
Go ahead, Elliot.
Well, I'm wondering if there's hope, because like, are things getting better? Like, if you think back to William and Mary in your experience, like, are colleges and universities doing a better job than they were when you were in college? Like, have you tell us about the dent you've made in this, in this problem, and how much better we're doing.
Well, when I was at William and Mary, there was no hashtag student parents. People were not having a national conversation about student parents, and we still have a long way to go. Student parents are not on the radar of enough people working in this sector. But there is momentum, there's movement, there is a movement, and it's been exciting to be a part of that movement and to be able to connect with people all over the country who are really passionate about making sure this population succeeds, as well as student parents themselves, just being able to be a part of their journeys and to see them being advocates in the work. So, for example, in the Family U cohort, we bring a student parent fellow in on each of those institutional teams. That's a compensated one-year fellowship where they are an expert around the table with institutional leaders and helping to craft the policies and the changes that need to happen at that institution to be more supportive of student parents. And so to see more of that, to see more spaces that are ensuring that student parents are at the table and that they have a voice. They're not just there at the table to, check a box, but to actually be a power broker around the table has been really exciting. What I will say when I look back at my experience at William and Mary, what has changed is the cost of higher education significantly. And the cost of childcare. And so in many ways, while we see momentum building around the awareness for student parents, our policies have not been building in the same direction to ensure that they're successful. Our policies really have to address the broken childcare system, really have to address how difficult it is to afford a post-secondary education, especially as a student parent where we know the costs are higher. And so that is another reason why at Generation Hope, we're also simultaneously doing this policy work with policymakers, because we have to make it feasible for student parents to actually go to college and to complete college.
Nicole, very quickly, because I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I have to ask, because it is a national conversation, is you have people who are interested in college a lot of times, and I'm wondering, from your cohort of students that you deal with, all of the students that you deal with that are parents, are we talking, is the conversation, yeah, I might go to college, but I'm not sure if I can, or I want to go to college, but I'm not sure if this whole 4-year degree thing is for me and I want to do something else that's more skills-based? Or is it, yes, I want to go to college and have a traditional type experience? There's so many different conversations in there now, especially with the whole value of a college degree being questioned. How does that rub off, so to speak, on the students that you're serving?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Here's what I think is the real the reality for many young parents and parents of any age when it comes to higher ed. And I think this has been the reality for a long time, which is there's no way I could go to college. There's no way I could go to college. One, I can't afford it. Two, I don't have enough hours in my day. And three, there's no mechanism in place for me as a parenting student to go to college to be successful in higher education. That has been the case, I think, for a really long time. And so the dilemma that I think institutions face now, as we're looking at these declining enrollment numbers, I just saw a study yesterday come out around the decline for women enrolling in college, right, is significant. And as we think about the fact that at the same time, we have this broken childcare system, we have all of these things, particularly for women of color coming out of the pandemic and how they were shouldering that burden of that pandemic, there is a real sense that college is not made for me. It is not a place where I would be successful. And so it's not even worth entertaining that. And so that's, I think, the real challenge that institutions face right now is how do we ensure that student parents see themselves realistically being supported at a college or university. I think there's a huge desire to go to college because you want to be able to provide for your family, but also feeling like it's unrealistic. And that's where I think the work rests, is how do we make it a realistic option?
Love that. Elliot, any final questions for our guest before I give her the final two to end the episode?
Yeah, I'm trying to solve for student success in two directions, helping institutions have better facilities and technology and support services, and then help students and families understand how colleges work so they can work for them. And I feel like you're similarly trying to attack a problem from both directions, institutional policy and data and so forth, and then helping students directly. And we've been talking mostly about the institutional perspective. What should they do different, better? I'm curious to hear your advice for student parents, what they can do in the meantime. Not that they can't make up for a broken system, but while we change the system, what can they do?
Yeah. So I just spoke last month at a convening of about 300 single mothers, many of whom were in college. And one thing that I stressed to them is something that I wish that I had told myself more and more when I was in college, which is, you're already amazing without the credential. You're already doing incredible things every day without the degree. I think so often we look at the degree or the title or the accolade as the thing that's going to validate us. And I think that in particular for marginalized students, like student parents, we really cling to that. And in reality, you make the degree special. You're the one who's gonna take that degree and do something amazing with it. I was among, I don't know, more than 1,000 graduates or close to 1,000 graduates when I got my degree in 2003 from William and Mary. I'm the only one who went on to start Generation Hope, and so that's the thing that I want student parents to understand, is that they don't need the degree to be, to be reminded of how amazing they are, that they should know that right now. But of course, the degree is going to unlock incredible, opportunities for them. And but just to make sure that they understand that, I think in those dark moments, it's easy to get lost in the fact that you haven't quite made it to the finish line.
Well said, Nicole. Appreciate that. We love to end our episodes with the same two questions of every guest. First of all, open mic to you. What didn't we talk about? Anything you want to say about Generation Hope? You can say whatever you want. You can just take the mic for a couple of minutes and love on your team, whatever you want to do. And then tell us.
You might regret that.
Yeah. No. Nah, we're going to be okay. Where there's editing involved if we have to. No, it's okay. Take the open mic and tell us anything you want the audience to know about Generation Hope, and then tell us what you see for the future of higher education.
So one thing that we didn't talk about, which I think is really important for folks to understand as we all are doing the student parent work, is the fact that student parent work is racial justice work. And as we are looking at completion rates for students of color and trying to figure out how do we improve those completion rates, we have to be talking about student parents. We know that student parents are more likely to be students of color, particularly Black female students. We know that almost half of Black undergraduate female students are parenting while going to college. And so it's a significant population. We also know that 71% of Black single fathers stop out of college. And so as we're looking at our DEI work, we have to incorporate student parent work into that effort. I always tell people it's hard to work on food insecurity when you don't know that your students have 2 and 3 other mouths to feed. It's very important that we're including the student parent population in our DEI work, in our food insecurity work, and all of those other things. So that I think is just a big piece of this puzzle. I do remain incredibly hopeful for higher education. I think the pandemic in particular has forced folks who are working in this field to really have some come to Jesus moments about who has been allowed to fall through the cracks in higher education historically, and also encourage people to be flexible and to challenge the way things have always been done. So I think there's a lot of hope coming out of the pandemic in terms of what can be done to ensure that our institutions are more inclusive and really help students of all walks of life feel like they belong. And I'm really excited about, as I said, students being big players in that work and being able to tell us, what they need and what they see as being possible.
Wow. I love this episode. I love the work. I know Elliot does too, because he's doing such similar work to bring awareness to students on how this all works. But student parents, so many times we forget of the struggles that they go through and how desperately we need every student in the education system to be valuable members of the workforce, however we get our education, right? There's so many ways to get it. There's hope out there, and it's coming from Generation Hope and your work, Nicole and Lewis. But before I let you go, I do have to give a little bit of a round of applause to my guest co-host. He's Elliot Felix, founder of Bright Spot Strategy and author of How to Get the Most Out of College. Elliot, thanks for guest co-hosting here on the EdUp Experience.
It was my pleasure, Joe. And thank you, Nicole, as well. Learn so much every time.
All right. And my guest, your guest today, she's Nicole Lynn Lewis. She's founder and CEO of Generation Hope and author of Pregnant Girl, which I'm sure you can pick up either of those two good books we talked about on Amazon, including mine, Commencement, The Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education. We're all book authors here. You should read all three of the books that we talked about today, valuable audience. Nicole, did you have a good time on the podcast today?
I did. I loved it. It was great.
Well, we appreciate you and the work you're doing. We're going to push this out to our audience as hard as possible because we have to advocate for student parents, and we hope that they will feel the love as more institutions change to serve them. So thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
With that, everybody, you've just EdUp'd. It's time to
Level up.
The beginning of a new era in higher education begins with you. Order your copy of Commencement, The Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education by Kate Colbert, Dr. Joseph Lucio, with contributions by Elvin Freitas. It's higher education's must-read book of 2022. Discover how you can seize the moment to change higher education forever. Commencement, The Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education, now available on Amazon. For bulk orders, contact Kate, Joe, or Elvin